After giving so many excuses and thinking about it for so long, she finally made the decision. She was going to bring him here, to this place. The one place she had been hiding from him since the very first day. He smiled at her in that narrow office hallway and made her feel like she was worth something again. Camille's hands would not stop shaking as she pushed the key into the lock. The door groaned open like it was warning her. The hallway hit them immediately, that familiar smell of old wood, damp walls, and someone's jollof rice from 2 doors down. The single bulb overhead was doing its absolute best, and still failing. The paint on the walls had given up a long time ago, peeling in strips like it was embarrassed to be there. And she stood there holding her breath, waiting. Because she had done this before. Not this exactly, but the moment right after, the moment a man's face changes. When the warmth drains out, and what's left is something colder. Something that looks a lot like a man recalculating his options. She had seen that face twice, and both times it had taken something from her she never fully got back. So she watched Adriano's face, like her whole life depended on it. And he just stood there, still, quiet. Not flinching. Not stepping back. Not doing the slow, sneaky scan of the room that men do when they are trying to figure out if staying is still worth it. He just turned and looked at her directly, and said the last thing she ever expected a man to say in that moment. But to understand why those words cracked her wide open, why they broke through walls she had spent 3 brutal years building around her heart, we need to go back. All the way back to who Camille Osei was before the world taught her that every man who said I love you to a rich lady was really just saying I see an opportunity. Camille Osei was 34 years old, and she had everything. And we mean everything. She stood 5'7" with the kind of presence that made people straighten up when she walked into a room. Deep, dark brown skin that glowed like she moisturized with liquid confidence. High cheekbones. Full lips. Natural hair that she wore in a big, gorgeous coil on top of her head like a crown she had earned. She was not the kind of beautiful that needed a second look. She was the kind that made people forget what they were saying mid-sentence. She was the founder and CEO of Osei Luxe Group, a private luxury lifestyle brand with offices in Houston, Texas. High-end interior consulting, exclusive event curation, premium real estate staging. The kind of company that rich people called when they wanted their lives to look like a magazine spread. And business was very, very good. From the outside, Camille's life looked like a vision board that had come true. A stunning penthouse in the Galleria area of Houston. A black Range Rover that she drove like she owned the road, because honestly she kind of did. A wardrobe that could make a fashion editor cry. A team of over 200 employees who respected her deeply. But here is the thing about beautiful, successful women. The world has a very specific way of making sure they never get to enjoy it in peace. Because behind all of that, behind the glass office and the designer shoes and the board meetings, Camille Osei was quietly, privately, devastatingly lonely. And it had a name. His name was Darian. Now, Darian came into her life 3 years before all of this. He was charming, smooth, the kind of man who knew exactly what to say and exactly when to say it. He had this deep, easy laugh and these warm brown eyes that made Camille feel like she was the only person in whatever room they were standing in. She fell for him fast, faster than she had ever fallen for anyone. And because she loved him, she opened everything up. Her home, her schedule, her accounts. She gave him access to parts of her life that she had never given anyone before. And Darian took it. All of it. When Camille finally figured out what had happened, her financial team laid it out on a conference table like a crime scene. Transfers. Wire instructions she had signed but never fully read. Investment accounts drained. Over $1.4 million gone. And so was Darian. Vanished like smoke. No forwarding address. No final conversation. Just a blocked number and a hole in her chest, the size of everything she used to believe about love. She did not cry in the office that day. She waited until she got to her car, sat in the underground parking garage alone, and let it out for exactly 11 minutes. Then she wiped her face, reapplied her lip gloss, and drove back to work, because that was what Camille did. She kept moving. But something shifted in her after Darian, something quiet and permanent, like a door that gets slammed so hard the frame warps and it never quite closes properly again. She smiled the same. She worked the same. She dressed the same. But every man who came close after that got the same invisible treatment. A polite, warm, beautifully constructed wall. And then came Everett. Everett was different, or so she thought. He was educated, well-spoken, came from a decent family. He courted her properly, took his time, did not push. For almost 6 months, Camille let herself breathe a little, let herself consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she had been unlucky the first time, and not foolish. But then one evening she came back early from a client dinner. Everett did not know she was home, and she heard him in the next room. On the phone, voice low and easy like a man who had been planning something for a long time. She stood in the hallway and listened. He was talking to someone about her. About the company. About her assets. About how he was close to getting what he needed. And then he would come back home and marry the woman his mother had been pushing him toward for 2 years. That once he locked in certain financial leverage from Camille, he was done. Camille stood there for a long time. Then she walked into the kitchen, poured herself a glass of cold water, drank it slowly, and called her lawyer the next morning. She ended things with Everett in a 3-minute conversation that she refused to let become emotional. She did not shout. She did not throw anything. She just looked at him and said she knew everything, and watched his whole face collapse. But even after Everett walked out of her penthouse for the last time, Camille sat on her living room floor for an hour and stared at nothing. Because she was tired. Not tired like she needed sleep. Tired in a deeper place. The place where hope lives. She was tired of being seen as a transaction. Tired of attracting men who looked at her and saw a way out of their own mediocrity. Tired of dressing up her loneliness in designer clothes and calling it independence. She called her best friend Imani that same night. Now, Imani Darko was the kind of friend everyone needed, and very few people deserved. She was 32, sharp as a tack, fiercely loyal, and she had the unique gift of saying the most uncomfortable truths in the calmest voice imaginable. She was also the only person on Earth who knew absolutely everything about Camille. The Darien situation. The Everett situation. All of it. Imani listened to the whole story without interrupting. And when Camille finished, there was a pause on the line. Then Imani said something that Camille was not expecting at all. She said she had an idea. Camille asked what kind of idea, and Imani told her to sit down first. Camille said she was already sitting. Imani said to sit down more comfortably, because this was going to sound insane at first. The idea was this. Osei Lux Group had a smaller branch office in Columbus, Ohio. It handled a scaled-down version of the same services. Modest client base. Medium-sized city. Nowhere near the glamour of Houston. Imani's suggestion was simple and completely wild at the same time. Camille should request a transfer to the Columbus branch. Not as CEO, not as founder, not as anyone important. She should go there quietly, work a frontline role, maybe receptionist, maybe office assistant, something ordinary, rent a modest place in a regular neighborhood, and just live. Not perform, not to impress, just live. And see, for the very first time, if a man could love Camille Osei the woman, separate from Camille Osei the empire. Camille's first response was silence. Her second response was to laugh. A short, disbelieving laugh. Her third response, after sitting with it for 2 full weeks, was to say yes. She made the internal arrangements carefully. A trusted senior manager handled the Houston operations. The Columbus branch manager was briefed only that a consultant named Camille would be joining the front office for an internal review period. Nothing more. No titles, no context, no background. Camille packed 2 suitcases. Not her usual luggage. Just 2 regular bags. Left the Range Rover in the garage. Took a flight to Columbus on a Tuesday morning like a woman going somewhere ordinary. And Columbus, Ohio received her with absolutely zero fanfare. Which was exactly the point. She found an apartment on Macon Street in a modest part of the East Side. The building was old. The elevator was purely decorative. It had not worked in what appeared to be several years. The apartment was a 1-bedroom with a kitchen barely large enough for one person to turn around in. The radiator clanked every night around midnight like it was reminding her it was still alive. The window in the bedroom looked directly into the brick wall of the building next door. Camille stood in the middle of that apartment the first evening with her 2 suitcases and looked around. And for a long moment she felt something very close to panic. But she breathed through it, unpacked, made her bed, and ordered delivery jollof rice from a small West African spot she found on her phone because she was not about to let the evening get any bleaker. She started at the Columbus branch the following Monday. The office was nothing like Houston. Smaller, quieter. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone and new faces got noticed immediately. Camille arrived in simple slacks, a plain blouse, natural hair pulled back, minimal jewelry, nothing that would signal anything about who she really was. And from day one, the office had opinions about her. Her supervisor, a woman named Rhonda, was in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and a sharper mouth. She had been running the Columbus branch's front operations for 6 years, and she made it very clear, without saying it directly, that she did not appreciate the addition of someone she had not personally requested. The comments started small. Little things, a sigh when Camille asked a question, a dismissive wave when she offered a suggestion, a very pointed comment during a team meeting about how some people took longer to learn simple processes, and some of the other women in the office followed Rhonda's energy like it was a dress code. But Camille kept her face even. She was not there to fight. She was there to learn something about herself and about life, so she smiled, did her work, kept her head down. She went on 2 dates during her first 8 weeks in Columbus. The first was a man she met through a colleague. He seemed pleasant enough, but somewhere around the 3rd conversation, he started asking very specific questions about where she worked, what the company did, what kind of growth opportunities there were. He asked if she could put in a good word for him with management. By the 4th conversation, she stopped responding. The second was worse. He actually said, sitting across from her at a mid-range restaurant on a Wednesday evening, that she seemed like a charity case. That a woman her age living in that part of the East Side in that kind of apartment clearly had some sort of situation going on. He said it with a smile, like it was a joke. Then he picked up his fork and kept eating. Camille put down her napkin, stood up, said goodnight, and walked out. She called Imani when she got back to the apartment. Imani answered on the 2nd ring, and when Camille told her what the man said, Imani's response was a very long pause, followed by, "He said what now?" They talked for 2 hours that night, and somewhere in the middle of that conversation, Camille said out loud what she had been quietly feeling for weeks. She said she was starting to think the whole idea was pointless, that maybe the problem was not her money or her status. Maybe the problem was just her. Maybe she was just someone who did not get to have this particular thing. And Imani, in her signature calm voice, told her to stop that, told her to give it more time, told her that the right one shows up when the ground is ready, not when you're ready to give up. Camille did not fully believe her, but she stayed. And about 2 weeks later, everything in that small Columbus office quietly, completely shifted. Because on a gray Tuesday morning in November, a new transfer came through. His name was Adriano Voss. And the moment he walked through that office door, every single woman in that building stopped what she was doing. Now here is the thing about Adriano Voss. He was 37, originally from Charlotte, North Carolina, with a father who was Colombian and a mother who was Black American. The combination had produced something genuinely unfair to everyone else in the room. He stood at 6'2" with a lean, athletic build that his dress shirt had absolutely no business fitting that well. Dark caramel skin, sharp jaw, close-cut fade that was crisp enough to make you wonder if his barber was also some kind of artist. A neat 5 o'clock shadow that sat on his face like it had been professionally placed there. Dark, intelligent eyes that moved through a room slowly, like he was reading something the rest of them could not see. He was the new regional operations lead, transferred from the Charlotte office. And just like that, the Columbus branch had a completely new energy. The women in the office moved differently when Adriano was around. Perfume got stronger. Outfits got more intentional. Conversations got louder in that very specific way people get louder when they want someone to notice them. A colleague named Petra practically redesigned her entire morning routine around being near the coffee machine at the same time as him. Another woman, Lourdes, started bringing in homemade food and leaving it near his desk with little handwritten notes. Camille watched all of this from her reception desk and did absolutely nothing, not because she did not feel it, because she absolutely felt it. The first time Adriano passed her desk and said good morning in that low, unhurried voice, something in her chest did something it had not done in a long time. But she knew herself. She knew her pattern. She knew what happened when she let herself feel things quickly and fully and without thinking. She knew what was left at the end of that road. So she smiled back, said good morning, and looked back down at her work. She was not going to perform for this man. She was not going to compete with Petra and Lourdes and whoever else was sharpening their edges for his attention. She had come to Columbus to find something real, or find out it did not exist. And real did not start with performance. But what Camille did not know, what she could not have predicted, was that her complete stillness in the middle of all that noise was the exact thing that Adriano Voss could not stop noticing. And that was only the beginning of something neither of them saw coming. So what happens when the one man who actually sees Camille for who she is starts getting closer? And what happens when the women in that office decide that Camille being liked by him is something they simply cannot allow? Hey, my people, if you are already hooked on Camille's story and you can feel that this is about to get very good, please do us a favor right now. Hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you are watching from. We genuinely love knowing how far this story travels. Now let's get back to Camille, because the moment she had been quietly dreading and secretly hoping for was getting very, very close. Adriano had been in the Columbus office for exactly 3 weeks when something happened that the rest of the staff would talk about for days. It was a Thursday afternoon. The office was winding down. Rhonda had called a brief team check-in near the front area, and she was in rare form that day. Sharp, dismissive, and for some reason she had decided that Camille was her topic of the afternoon. It started with a comment about a filing error that had happened 2 days earlier. An honest mistake, the kind that happened in every office. But Rhonda held it up like evidence of something larger. Said, loudly enough for the room to hear, that some people in the office were clearly still figuring out how to function at a basic professional level. Said it with her eyes directly on Camille. A few people smiled. Petra looked at her nails. Camille kept her face still, shoulders straight, eyes forward. And then Rhonda added, almost as an afterthought, that she was not sure what the Houston office was thinking, sending them someone who still needed this much hand-holding. The room was quiet, and then a calm voice came from near the back. Adriano said, without looking up from his folder, that the filing system in the Columbus branch had 3 different outdated formatting protocols running simultaneously, and that anyone new to the office would find it confusing. He said it flatly, like a man stating the weather. Then he looked up and suggested, very politely, that maybe a unified protocol would solve the problem, rather than singling out individuals. The room went very quiet in a different way. Rhonda's expression shifted. Just for a second. Then she gathered her things and dismissed the check-in. Camille did not look at Adriano after that. She gathered her own things slowly and professionally. But her heart was doing something completely unprofessional, because no one in that office had ever done that before. Not once. And she had been there for months. She gathered her things, stepped out into the cold November air, and made her way to the bus stop on the corner. She sat on the hard plastic seat with her bag on her lap, watching Columbus move past the window in the dark, and said nothing the whole ride home to Macon Street. And she thought about what it meant that a man who did not know her, did not owe her anything, had stood up in a room full of people and said, "This is not right." She thought about it for a long time, and somewhere in the middle of thinking about it, she realized with a quiet kind of terror that she was already in trouble, because Camille Osei, who had promised herself she was done with this feeling, was already falling. And the question now was not whether Adriano would catch her. The question was, what would happen when he found out who she really was? The days after Adriano stood up for Camille in that meeting were strange in a way she could not fully explain. Nothing dramatic happened. No grand conversation. No moment where they locked eyes across the office and the world slowed down like a movie scene. It was quieter than that. More ordinary. And somehow that made it worse. Because ordinary was exactly what Camille had not been prepared for. He would pass her desk in the morning and say good morning. And it was never a performance. Never the kind of good morning that was really saying, look at me, notice me, respond the way I want you to. It was just 2 simple words delivered in that low, unhurried voice of his. Like she was worth the breath without needing to earn it. She started noticing small things about him. The way he always held the door for whoever was walking behind him without making a production of it. The way he sat in meetings with his long fingers laced together on the table, listening more than he spoke. The way he laughed, a real laugh, not the kind people perform in offices to seem likable. And she noticed the way other people responded to him. The women in the office had not slowed down their campaign for his attention. If anything, they had intensified. Petra had started sitting closer to his side of the room during team briefings. Lourdes had graduated from homemade food to a very obvious new perfume that arrived every morning approximately 10 minutes before Adriano did. A younger colleague named Simone had taken to asking him work questions that she absolutely knew the answers to, just to have a reason to stand near his desk for 5 minutes. Camille watched all of it with a kind of quiet amusement, and stayed in her lane. But Adriano was not playing along. He was always perfectly polite, helpful, professional. He answered Simone's questions without lingering. He thanked Lourdes for the food without encouraging the habit. He smiled at Petra without feeding the energy she was putting out. And then he would walk to the front of the office and talk to Camille. Not for long. Never anything that could be classified as significant. A comment about the weather. A question about a document she had filed. Once, a very dry observation about the fact that the office printer had broken down for the 3rd time in 2 weeks, and that at some point it stopped being bad luck and started being a personality trait. Camille had laughed at that one before she could stop herself. A real laugh. The kind that came out before she had time to decide whether she wanted it to. Adriano had smiled at her when she laughed. Not a smooth, practiced smile. Just a real one. And that was the moment Petra walked past and saw the whole thing. The look on Petra's face was brief, but it said everything. It was the look of a woman who had been working very hard on something and had just watched someone else receive it without trying at all. It lasted less than 3 seconds. Then Petra's face went neutral, and she kept walking. But Camille caught it. And she knew. She knew what was coming before it even arrived. Now here is the thing about workplace dynamics. When a man that everyone wants starts paying quiet attention to the one woman that nobody has deemed worthy of anything, the atmosphere does not just shift. It curdles. Slowly, but completely. The small digs from Rhonda got sharper. A sigh became a direct comment. A raised eyebrow became a full statement delivered in front of colleagues. One morning, Rhonda told Camille, in front of 3 other staff members, that she needed to redo an entire document because the formatting was not up to standard. Camille looked at the document. The formatting was identical to the template the office used. She redid it anyway, said nothing. Petra started doing something more subtle. She began having conversations near Camille's desk that were designed to be overheard. Conversations about the kind of women Adriano had apparently dated before. Accomplished women. Women with real careers. Women who were going somewhere. Said loudly with a casual tone and eyes that never quite looked at Camille directly. Lourdes did not bother being subtle at all. She asked Camille once in the kitchen very sweetly what exactly her qualifications were because she had not seen Camille's professional background on any of the internal documents. She said it with a smile that had absolutely nothing warm inside it. Camille poured her coffee, said her background was in client relations, smiled back and walked out of the kitchen. She called Imani that night. Now Imani had a gift for cutting straight to the heart of something without wasting any time. When Camille finished describing the situation, Imani was quiet for a moment. Then she said, with complete calm, that a bunch of women sharpening their knives over a man who had already chosen to spend his 5 free minutes talking to Camille was not a crisis. It was a compliment wearing a costume. Camille said it was not that simple. Imani said it was exactly that simple. She also said that the fact that Camille was more worried about the women's reactions than about what Adriano actually made her feel was very telling. And that maybe instead of watching everything from a careful distance, Camille should consider the radical idea of just being a person who existed near him without running a risk assessment every 30 seconds. Camille was quiet for a moment. Then she said she did not know how to do that anymore. And Imani said softly, because she loved her friend, that she knew. And that was the whole point of being there in Columbus in the first place. Not to find a perfect situation with 0 risk, but to find out if she was still capable of letting someone in. Even a little. They hung up and Camille lay on her bed in the dark in that small apartment on Macon Street, with the radiator clanking its midnight rhythm and the brick wall sitting outside her window like a loyal, ugly companion. And she thought about Adriano Voss. Not strategically, not cautiously, just thought about him the way a person thinks about something that has gotten under their skin without permission. The next morning she arrived at the office and he was already there. Earlier than usual, standing at the small window near the break room with a cup of coffee, looking out at the gray Columbus morning. He heard her come in and turned. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she said back. And then, because something in her had shifted approximately 2 millimeters overnight, she added, "You're here early." He nodded, said he slept badly, that new apartments had a sound adjustment period, and his was currently in what he called its loudest phase. Camille almost said something about her radiator, stopped herself, then said it anyway. She told him about the radiator, about the midnight clanking, about how she had started thinking of it as a roommate with poor social skills. He laughed. That real laugh, and said that was a very generous interpretation. They stood there for a few minutes, talking about terrible apartment sounds. It was possibly the most ordinary conversation in the world. Nothing memorable. Nothing cinematic. But when Camille sat down at her desk afterward, she realized her hands were steady in a way they had not been in a long time. The weeks that followed had a rhythm. Adriano and Camille did not make a thing of it. There was no declaration, no asked-out moment, no dramatic gesture. But the small conversations became a quiet constant. A few minutes here. A shared observation there. Once a whole lunch break spent sitting across from each other in the small break room because everyone else had gone out, and neither of them had made plans, and somehow an hour passed before either of them noticed. Camille laughed more during that lunch break than she had laughed in months. She also caught herself doing something she had not done since before Darien, something she did not even fully register until she was on the bus home that evening, watching the Columbus streets blur past the window. She had not once, during that entire hour, thought about what he wanted from her. She had just been there, present, talking, listening, being a person in a room with another person. It felt dangerously close to normal. But the office was watching. Rhonda had noticed the lunch break. Petra had definitely noticed the lunch break. The temperature in the room after that afternoon had a different quality to it. Rhonda found 3 more things to correct about Camille's work that week. Petra stopped making eye contact entirely, which was somehow worse than the loaded looks. And Lourdes made a comment in a team meeting about how certain people in the office seemed very comfortable for someone who was supposedly still in a learning phase. Adriano, who was in the meeting, looked up slowly when Lourdes said it. He did not say anything immediately, but he held Lourdes with a long, very steady look that made the air in the room shift. Then he moved the meeting forward like nothing had happened. But after the meeting, as people filed out, he fell into step beside Camille. He did not make a speech about it, did not turn it into something heavy. He just said, quietly, that he had noticed the pattern, and that she should not let anyone make her feel like she was less. Camille kept walking, kept her face forward, said in a voice she kept very even, "I know my worth." And he said, just as quietly, "I know you do. I just wanted to make sure you knew that I knew too." She did not respond to that, but her jaw tightened, and her eyes went briefly bright, and she looked straight ahead and kept walking, because she was absolutely not about to let him see what those words just did to her. She barely slept that night. Not the bad kind of barely sleeping. The kind where your mind just keeps turning something over, examining it from different angles like it cannot quite believe what it is holding. Because here was the thing about Adriano Vos that was different from anyone who had come before him. He was not trying. He was not building towards something. He was not performing patience the way Everett had, using warmth as an investment strategy. He was just consistently, quietly himself. And in being himself, he kept accidentally destroying every wall she had carefully built. And that was the most terrifying thing she had encountered in 3 years. Because walls built against pain are not just barriers. They become identity. They become the way you explain yourself to yourself. And when someone starts dismantling them without even trying, without any agenda, you do not just feel exposed. You feel like you have to decide who you are without them. 3 days later, Adriano asked her something that stopped her completely. They were walking out of the office at the end of the day. It had become a kind of accidental routine. They left around the same time most evenings and walked to the corner together before going their separate ways. He toward the parking lot. She toward the bus stop. It was a Tuesday, cold. The sky was doing that thing Columbus skies did in late November, where they could not decide between gray and darker gray. He asked if he could see where she lived, not in a forward way, not pressuring. He said it simply. Said he wanted to know where she went at the end of the day. That he realized he knew what made her laugh, and what made her jaw set when she was trying not to react to something, but he did not know what her door looked like or what neighborhood she walked through in the morning. He said it like it was the most natural thing to want to know about someone. And Camille's whole system went still. Because she heard the question, and underneath the question, she heard all the things it carried. Intimacy, trust, the next step of something that had been quietly growing between them for weeks. And she also heard, louder than any of that, the sound of every excuse she had already been preparing. She told him she would think about it. He nodded. Did not push. Said okay. They reached the corner. He went left toward the parking lot. She went right toward the bus stop. And she stood at that bus stop in the cold with her coat pulled tight and her mind doing laps around one single question. How do you show someone the part of your life you built to protect yourself from people like the ones who hurt you, when the person asking is the first one in years who has given you absolutely no reason to be afraid? She called Imani before the bus even arrived. Imani picked up and said hello, and Camille said, "He asked to see my apartment." There was a pause. Then Imani said, "And you said?" Camille said she told him she would think about it. Another pause. Then Imani said, very slowly, like she was choosing each word carefully, "Camille Osei, that man has stood up for you, made you laugh until you forgot to be guarded, walked you to your corner every evening for 3 weeks, and asked to see your front door. What exactly are you thinking about?" Camille said she was thinking about everything. About what he would see. About what he would think. About whether the apartment would change things the way everything else always changed things. And Imani said something then that sat with Camille for a long time. She said, "You did not go to Columbus to find a man who loved you at your best. You went there to find out if a man could see you at your most ordinary and still choose to stay. So if you keep refusing to show him the ordinary, you are not protecting yourself. You are just running the same test in a different city and refusing to mark the answer sheet." The bus came. Camille got on, sat by the window, watched Columbus move past her in the dark, and somewhere between the 4th and 5th stop on her route home, she made a decision. She was gonna show him. She was going to show Adriano Vos where she lived. The narrow hallway, the peeling paint, the brick wall outside the bedroom window, the radiator with its midnight personality disorder. All of it. But first, she was going to tell him why she had been making excuses. Because he deserved that much. And honestly, so did she. She got off at her stop, walked the 3 blocks to her building, climbed the stairs because the elevator had been decorative for what felt like decades, put the key in the lock, stood in the middle of her small apartment, and thought about what she was going to say. She practiced it in her head 3 different ways that night. All three versions felt inadequate. But she kept the bones of it. The truth of it. She had been hurt before, not once. Twice. By men who saw her as a means to something. And because of that, she had built a very specific kind of careful around herself. And showing him this apartment was the kind of thing that careful was designed to prevent. But she was going to do it anyway, because she was tired of being careful. And because if there was even a small chance that Adriano Voss was exactly what he appeared to be, a man who was genuinely, simply, fully there, then she owed it to herself to find out. She told him the next morning at the corner before they walked into the office. She said, "I want to tell you why I kept saying I'd think about it." He stopped walking, turned to face her, gave her his full attention the way he always did, like there was nothing more important than whatever she was about to say. She told him, not everything, not Darian by name, not Everett's full story, but the shape of it, the outline, that she had been seen as something to use before, that she had learned to be careful, that showing someone where she actually lived felt like handing over something she did not know if she was ready to risk. She said all of this looking at the pavement mostly, because looking at him while she said it felt like too much. When she finished, there was a silence. Then Adriano said, quietly and with complete steadiness, "I am not them." He said it without drama, without performance. The way a person states something they have no doubt about. Then he said that he was not asking to see her apartment because of what it contained or what it said about her position in the world. He said he was asking because he wanted to understand her life. The actual one, not the curated version people showed when they were trying to impress someone. The real one. He said love. And he let that word sit there in the cold morning air between them like it was perfectly comfortable being said out loud, was not measured by what someone could provide. It was measured by what two people felt, and the respect they carried for each other. Camille looked up at him when he said that. He was looking straight at her, calm, steady, like a man who had thought about this before today and was not surprised to find himself saying it. Her throat did something complicated. She said, "Saturday," and he responded, "Saturday." And they walked into the office. And if Camille's hands were not entirely steady for the rest of that morning, well, nobody had to know that but her. But Saturday was coming, and with it, the moment that would change absolutely everything. Because what Camille did not know yet was that Adriano Voss had a truth of his own sitting quietly in his back pocket. Something he had not said yet. Something that, when it finally came out, would make everything she thought she understood about the situation look completely different. And it was coming faster than either of them realized. Saturday arrived the way important days always do, quietly. Without announcement. Just another cold Columbus morning that looked exactly like the ones before it, except for the fact that Camille had been awake since 5 a.m., staring at her brick wall like it owed her an explanation. She had cleaned the apartment 3 times. Not deep cleaned. It was already clean. She was not that person who let things go. But she had wiped the kitchen counter twice, straightened the single shelf above the small television, refolded the throw blanket on the couch, stood in the middle of the room and looked at everything with the eyes of a woman trying to see what a man who did not know her secret would see when he walked through that door. And every time she did that exercise, her stomach dropped a little. Because the apartment was what it was. Narrow. Old. Honest. The kind of place that told the truth about a person's circumstances without asking permission. The radiator was already clanking softly in the corner like it was warming up for its evening performance. The window in the bedroom still faced the brick wall of the next building with complete commitment. The kitchen still had exactly enough room for one person, and the idea of another. She had not decorated, had not tried to make it look like anything other than what it was. Because that was the whole point, wasn't it? If she started staging it, she was missing the entire lesson she had come to Columbus to learn. She put on dark jeans, a simple cream sweater, her natural hair loose around her shoulders. No performance. Just herself. He texted at 11. On my way. 15 minutes. She read it, put her phone face down on the counter, picked it up again, read it again, put it back down. Called Imani. Imani answered immediately like she had been waiting, which she absolutely had been. He is on his way, Camille said. I know. You texted me at 5 a.m. this morning, Imani replied, completely unbothered. I cleaned the apartment 3 times, Camille admitted. Camille, Imani said flatly. I know, Camille said. Imani told her to breathe. Told her this was not a performance review. Told her the man had already said what he said at the corner on Thursday morning, and that his words were not the words of a man running a calculation. Then she told her to hang up the phone and go be present. Camille hung up, stood in the middle of her small apartment, breathed. The knock came exactly 15 minutes later. She crossed the small living room, put her hand on the door handle, stood there for one extra second that she would never admit to anyone. Then she opened the door. Adriano stood in the hallway in a dark gray Henley, dark jeans, his fade sharp and clean, that 5 o'clock shadow sitting on his jaw like it had been professionally placed there. He had a small paper bag in one hand. He looked at her first, not at the apartment behind her. At her. "Good morning," he said warmly. She stepped aside to let him in, and said good morning back. He walked in slowly. Not the slow of a man being careful or polite about what he was seeing, the slow of a man who was genuinely taking something in. He looked around the small living room. The kitchen. The single shelf. The radiator in the corner. The window with its loyal brick wall view outside. He was quiet for a moment, and Camille stood near the door with her arms loose at her sides and her face completely still and her heart absolutely nowhere near as still as her face. Then Adriano turned to look at her. "I like it," he said simply. She blinked. "It feels like you," he continued, looking around one more time. "Honest. No extra. Just what it needs to be." She did not know what to do with that, so she looked at the bag in his hand and said, "You brought something." He looked down at it like he had briefly forgotten he was holding it, and said he had stopped at a place on the way. Then he asked, "Have you eaten breakfast?" "No," she said. "Good," he replied. And just like that, he moved to her small kitchen like he had been there before, set the bag on the counter, and started pulling things out. Fresh bread from a nearby bakery, eggs, a small container of sliced fruit, and a coffee that was still warm in a paper cup with her name written on the side in his handwriting. Camille stood at the edge of the kitchen watching this man move around her tiny space like it was the most natural thing in the world. And something inside her, something old and guarded and exhausted, put down something heavy it had been carrying for a very long time. They ate breakfast at her small table, knees almost touching because the table was exactly that small. He asked her about Columbus, what she thought of the city, what she did on weekends. Then he looked at her with that dry, straight face of his and asked whether the bus route from Macon Street was reliable, or the kind of unreliable that built character. She laughed out loud at that one. He asked about her family. She kept it general. Said she was close with her mother, that she had a younger brother who thought he was funnier than he actually was, that she grew up in a household where working hard was not a suggestion, it was just the air you breathed. He nodded like that landed somewhere familiar in him. She asked about him, and he leaned back slightly in his chair and said his father came to the States from Colombia when he was 19 with $40, and a very specific kind of stubbornness that apparently got passed down genetically. His mother was from Memphis originally. They met at a bus stop in Charlotte, he said, and then added with a completely straight face that he had always thought that was either very romantic or a very strong argument for public transportation. Camille smiled wide at that one. He said he had worked in operations management for 11 years. That he had transferred to Columbus because he had been comfortable in Charlotte for too long and comfort, for him, was a yellow flag. That he needed new friction to stay sharp. What kind of friction? She asked, genuinely curious. The kind that makes you think differently, he said. New problems, new people. He paused for just a beat. New people especially. He was looking directly at her when he said it. She held his gaze for a moment, then looked down at her coffee cup. But she was smiling. Now here is the thing about that morning that Camille would turn over in her mind for weeks afterward. It was not one big moment. There was no dramatic revelation, no grand gesture that rewrote everything. It was just two people eating breakfast in a small apartment on a cold Saturday morning in Columbus, Ohio. Talking, laughing, taking up the same quiet space without either of them needing to make it into something it was not yet. But it was everything. Because Camille had sat across from men in five-star restaurants who made her feel completely invisible. And here she was in a kitchen barely big enough for one person feeling more seen than she had felt in years. That was the real thing Darian had taken from her, that she had not fully named until this moment. Not just the money. Not even just the trust. He had taken her ability to be present, to just exist in a moment with someone without running silent threat assessments in the background. And Everett had taken whatever was left of that. But sitting here, in this honest little apartment with this man who had brought her breakfast and said her place felt like her, and meant it as a compliment. She felt present, fully, quietly, terrifyingly present. They stayed at that small table for 2 hours. When Adriano finally stood to leave, he gathered the paper bag and the empty coffee cups, and dropped them in the bin without being asked, without making a moment of it, without even looking up, like it was just reflex. And that small thing, that completely automatic small thing, told Camille more about who he was than a lot of men managed to show in months. At the door he stopped, turned to her. "Thank you for showing me," he said quietly. "Thank you for not making it into something to run from," she said back. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "I told you. I'm not them," and left. She closed the door, stood with her back against it in the empty apartment, and breathed. Then she slid down the door very slowly until she was sitting on the floor with her knees pulled up and the biggest, most helpless, most disbelieving smile on her face that she had worn in 3 years. She sat there for a full minute. Then she called Imani. "Well," Imani said the second she picked up. "I think I'm in serious trouble," Camille said, in a voice that was trying very hard to be casual and failing completely. "Finally," Imani said. But here is where the story shifts. Because while Camille was sitting on her apartment floor, falling quietly and completely into something she had not expected to survive, something was happening on the other side of Columbus that she did not know about yet. Something that had been in motion long before Adriano walked into that branch office on a gray Tuesday morning. See, Adriano Voss had a truth he had not shared yet. Not out of deception, not because he was hiding something sinister, but because timing had not felt right. Because the thing he was carrying was significant, and he had not found the version of their relationship yet that felt ready to hold it. But someone else was about to find out first. And that someone was Rhonda. Now Rhonda, for all her sharpness and her managed territory, and her 6 years of running the Columbus front operations, was not careless. She was the kind of woman who paid attention to details, who noticed things. And in the weeks since Adriano had arrived, she had been noticing things about him that did not quite fit the profile of a standard regional operations transfer. His questions in meetings were too specific, too structural, the kind of questions someone asked when they were not just managing a region but understanding a whole system. He had access to financial reports that nobody at his stated level should have had clearance for. He knew things about the parent company that a Columbus branch employee would have no reason to know. Rhonda had started asking questions through her own quiet channels. And on the same Saturday that Camille was sitting on her apartment floor with that helpless smile, Rhonda received an answer that made her sit very still at her own kitchen table for a long time. Adriano Voss was not a regional operations lead on a standard transfer. He was a senior internal auditor for the parent company. He had been sent to the Columbus branch specifically. And the reason he had been sent was that someone had filed a confidential internal complaint about systematic workplace misconduct. A documented pattern of targeted harassment, professional undermining, and hostile work environment behavior directed at a specific employee. That complaint had been filed 6 weeks ago, right around the time Camille arrived. But here is the part that Rhonda could not yet see from where she was sitting. The part that would rearrange everything when it finally came out. The complaint had not been filed by Camille. Camille did not even know it existed. So who filed it? And what happened when Rhonda found out that the man she had been dismissing as a romantic distraction had actually been watching everything she did from the very moment he walked through that office door? If you think Rhonda is about to make the biggest mistake of her professional life, then drop a comment right now and tell us what you think she is going to do next. And if you have been riding with Camille this whole time and you are not subscribed yet, then what exactly are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications, because what is coming next will have you talking about this story for days. The following Monday arrived, and the Columbus office felt different, not visibly, not in any way a casual observer would notice. The desks were the same. The printer was still broken in that very personal way it had. The coffee machine was still working through its feelings every morning. But Rhonda came in with a different quality to her stillness. She was not her usual sharp and restless self. She was contained, watching, the kind of quiet that was not peace but preparation, like a woman who had received information and had not yet decided what to do with it but was absolutely going to do something. Camille felt it the moment she walked in. She had learned to read that office the way you learn to read a room you have lived in long enough. And the temperature that Monday had a very specific charge to it that made the back of her neck prickle. Adriano arrived at his usual time, said good morning to the room generally and to Camille specifically, with slightly more warmth than generally, which Camille received into her system while keeping her face professionally pleasant and unbothered. Petra noticed. Said nothing. Lourdes noticed. Said nothing. Rhonda noticed. And wrote something down in the small notepad she kept on the left side of her desk, which she only ever opened when she was building something. The morning moved. Lunch came. Adriano spent most of it in a closed meeting with the branch manager, Gerald, who walked out of that meeting looking like a man who had just been told something significant about the building he had been managing for years. When Adriano came out, he stopped at Camille's desk on his way back and asked very quietly whether she had time for a short walk at the last break. Sure, she said simply. They walked 1 block from the office in the late afternoon cold. Camille's coat buttoned all the way up, her breath visible in the air. Adriano walked beside her with his hands in his pockets. He was quiet for almost half a block before he spoke. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Okay," she said. "I should have told you sooner," he continued, his voice measured and steady. "I kept waiting for the right moment, but better moments have a way of not showing up when you keep postponing them." She slowed her pace, turned to look at him. He did not look away. "I was not sent to Columbus on a standard transfer," he said. She waited. He told her. All of it. That he worked an internal audit for the parent company. That he had been assigned to the Columbus branch on a specific mandate. That 6 weeks before he arrived, a confidential complaint had been filed about the work environment at the branch. A documented pattern of targeted misconduct, directed specifically at a new employee. Camille stopped walking completely. He stopped too. Turned to face her. "A complaint about me?" she asked carefully. "Filed on your behalf," he said. "Not by you." She stared at him. He said the identity of the person who filed the complaint was protected under internal reporting protocol and he could not share that part. But he told her it was someone who had observed what was happening from close enough to document it in specific and damaging detail. Multiple incidents, dates, named witnesses. A thorough account that left very little room for interpretation. Camille's mind started moving, sorting through faces, moments. Who had been close enough? Who had seen enough? Who would have? She looked at him. "How long have you known?" she asked. "About me, who I actually am." He held her gaze and did not hesitate. "I knew before I arrived," he said. "The audit file includes background on all primary parties. I knew you were the subject of the complaint the day I walked in." The cold air settled between them, and Camille felt something pass through her that she could not name right away. It was several things at once. Something that felt like the beginning of betrayal trying to find its footing, trying to arrange itself the way betrayal needed to be arranged. But the facts kept getting in the way, because nothing he had done pointed anywhere dark. Not one single thing. "So the breakfast," she said, her voice very even. "The walks, the corner every evening, were never in any file," he said firmly. "Never any audit, never any professional obligation." He looked at her steadily. "I am telling you now because you deserve to know the full picture. And because whatever this is between us, I do not want it standing on anything incomplete." The wind moved through the street between them. Camille looked at the pavement for a moment, processing. Then she looked back up. "Who else knows?" she asked. "About me, my real background." "The branch manager as of today's meeting," he said. "And as of this conversation, the audit findings move to the next stage, which means Rhonda and the others will be formally notified that there is an active investigation." She nodded slowly, absorbing all of it. "And my identity," she said carefully, "as founder. Does that come out?" "That is entirely your choice," he said. "It was always going to be your choice. The audit does not require it." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, almost to herself more than to him, "I came here to find out if someone could see me without all of it. Without the title and the company and everything attached to my name. I just wanted someone to see me." He looked at her with that steady, unhurried attention of his. "I see you," he said simply. She looked at him. "I saw you before I knew any of it," he continued. "And I see you right now. And it is the same thing." Camille's jaw tightened. Her eyes went briefly, dangerously bright. She looked away down the empty street for a long moment, blinking once. Then she said quietly, "Okay. Just that. Okay." And they walked back to the office together through the cold gray Columbus afternoon. But the investigation was now moving. And Rhonda, who had been building her own quiet picture from the outside, was about to discover that the man she had underestimated had been assembling a case with surgical patients since the morning he first walked through that office door. And everything she had controlled and managed and dominated in that branch for 6 years was about to be laid out, very calmly, on a conference room table for the entire parent company to see. But that was not even the biggest revelation waiting in the wings, because Camille still did not know who had filed that complaint, who had seen enough of what was happening to her and cared enough to do something about it quietly, without telling her, without asking for credit. Someone in that office had been her silent guardian from the very beginning. And when that name finally came out, and it was coming, it was going to completely rewrite the way Camille understood her entire time in Columbus. Every single day of it. And the question sitting at the center of all of this now was not just about Rhonda's consequences or the audit's outcome. It was about what Camille was going to do with the truth of who she really was. Because she had come to Columbus with a secret, and that secret was sitting in the walls of this story like a pressure that had been building for months. And in the final episode, that pressure was going to find its release. One way or another.